On a desolate battlefield that is populated with mean faces for some reason, a hero faces off against the demon lord who mocks him. The demon lord is charging up a purple attack and states that if the hero fails to stop him, then the world will come to an end. The hero acknowledges this and flicks up a rock which will be his last resort. The demon's spell forms a giant rock in the sky, which he then proceeds to chuck at the hero. The hero in response chucks the rock that he picked up, and the two rocks collide head-on. However, despite what high school physics would have you believe, the smaller rock wins the battle of momentum and pushes the larger rock back, destroying it completely. The hero is tired of all the cheap tricks that the demon has been pulling and is ready to finish this battle with an all-out assault. The demon agrees to end this quickly, and they both get into battle stances. The demon rushes forward with his satanic power, and the hero does the same with his golden dragon power. The two clash several times in the span of a second, and they seem to be evenly matched. The battle rages on, and the ground beneath their feet is destroyed under the sheer force of their clash. Once the dust settles, the demon lord seems worse for wear with labored breathing and torn clothes, but the same can be said for the hero. The two stagger towards each other, and without care for their own lives, they stab each other straight through the chest and collapse to the ground. As the last morsels of life escape the hero's body, he is simply happy that his battle is finally over and he can finally rest. Sometime later, students are seen heading into school in the morning, and one boy with a very obvious main character haircut is the most excited of all the students to be there. He can't wait to make friends and have a normal life as a normal person would do. He struts through the halls like, "Hello, my fellow normal students, it's a very normal day we're having, isn't it?" The other students find him strange but don't want to get directly involved, so they don't say anything about it. But when he walks straight up to them to introduce himself as Blade, it becomes really hard for them to keep their distance. The guys introduce themselves as Cassim and Clay, and the girls are Jessica and Claire. Blade firmly declares that he is here to make friends, and Claire asks if he wants to be friends with them. Blade obviously agrees and is elated to already have 4 friends, so much so that he now wants to make it 100 friends at school. Their conversation is then interrupted by a red-haired girl who reprimands them for making a commotion in the middle of the school halls. The girl is Ernest Flaming. She is ranked #1 in the school, and thus has been given the title of Empress among the student body, not someone you could just walk up to, but Blade couldn't care less about titles. He gets right up in her face and introduces himself to her, but Ernest is more interested in knowing why she has never seen him here before. The others inform her that he is actually a transfer student that just arrived in the school, but Ernest can't believe that the famed Rosewood Academy that only admits students who have the aim of becoming heroes of justice would allow such a late admission. Blade states that he has no intention of becoming a hero at all, and he just wants to make friends here. Upon hearing this, Ernest is enraged and yells at him for having such weak resolve, but Blade is unfazed by this and just asks her to take him to the headmaster's office since he was already meant to go there. Ernest and Blade arrive at the huge doors of the headmaster's office, and she announces their presence. They are told to come in, and upon seeing the man who is seated across from them, Ernest immediately bows down. But once again, Blade doesn't give a damn and just walks forward. Ernest tries to stop him and asks him if he really doesn't know who is seated in front of them, but Blade is aware that it is the king. He just doesn't care. She tries to apologize for his rudeness, but the king isn't offended in the slightest. He praises Ernest for her excellent record and states that he's going to be the new academy headmaster starting from today onwards. Upon hearing this, Ernest starts expressing her happiness to be instructed by the king himself, while Blade just stands there and watches her. The king has had enough of her ego stroking and tells her to shut her mouth and get the hell out of his office, but in a more polite way. The king only wants to talk with Blade, and now Ernest is angry that he is getting all the king's attention and stomps off. Blade asks the king why he had to go and do that, because now Ernest probably hates him. The king states that he is here to help with Blade's rehabilitation as a hero and will be making some changes to the curriculum to help him regain his power. But Blade doesn't want that at all. He just wants to be a normal human now. But the king has no intention of letting him remain normal. He wants him to regain his power even though the demon lord is dead. Later, Blade heads to the training grounds, where a bunch of students are working on their respective strengths, and he spots Ernest there. She asks him what he is doing here since this is the advanced class, and Blade states that when he took the test for the lower class, they told him to come here. But she isn't buying it, and when he shows his badge to prove it, then she thinks he must have bribed someone to get bumped up to the advanced class, or at least cheated in some way to get into the academy, since the academy would never admit someone who didn't want to be a hero. But once again, all he wants to do is to become friends with 100 people, so he starts asking everyone in the training grounds to be his friend while Ernest is still talking. She's upset that he is ignoring her and tells him to listen to her when she is speaking, but then he puts his hand on her head and tells her that he is still listening to her. She is embarrassed by this and pulls out her sword to slash at him, but he effortlessly jumps over the blade and the slash goes off and hits a wall. She is surprised that he was able to dodge the strike, but before she can say anything, another student comes up and tells them that the teacher has asked all the students to gather. Blade, not one to miss an opportunity to make a friend, introduces himself to the girl and asks for her name, but she doesn't answer at first. Ernest mentions how the girl doesn't like to talk to people, but after Blade's insistence, she tells him that her name is Sophie. Ernest is slightly pissed that Blade was actually able to get her to talk, so she asks the teacher to let her test Blade's abilities in class. She tells Blade to use a sword to slice through a set of enchanted armor, which is something that any advanced class student would be able to do. So if Blade can't do it, then it will prove that he cheated to get into the school and he will be forced to leave. Blade doesn't seem too nervous and just asks her what the appropriate level of power would be for the advanced class. And when she says 3 levels above normal, he activates his second sword technique, which absolutely atomizes the suit of armor and some of Ernest's clothes as well. Everyone is somewhat damaged from the force of Blade's attack, and Ernest asks who he really is, but he still says he is just an ordinary guy. Later at lunch, Blade sits down at Ernest's table and calls his other friends over to sit at the table, but they decline the offer. Ernest says that they don't want to sit here because they are afraid of her, but Blade wonders what it is that they find to be so scary about her. He takes a bite of his food and immediately is amazed by how delicious it tastes. Ernest apologizes to him for what she said earlier, since she thought that he had cheated his way into the academy when he was actually strong enough to make it on his own. But Blade had already forgotten all about that, so he tells her not to worry about it. He thanks her for being his friend, but she is taken aback that he considers her a friend. She is embarrassed, but is also happy to finally have a friend of her own. Later that night, Ernest is in her room, still happy that she finally has a friend, when suddenly the sword on the wall makes a sound and she recalls her childhood. She saw the sword, which told her to surrender herself to it, and obviously, she grabs the damn, probably cursed sword, and then her hair turned red. The next day, Ernest is training with some other students with that same cursed sword. She is engaged in battle with a lancer. He activates his lance, but she just swats him away and he has been defeated. But then the curse kicks in, and she's about to split this guy's head open, but manages to stop herself at the last minute. She calls for the next challenger, and Sophie steps up to battle. They take blows across the field, but then Ernest jumps into the air and launches a flame strike, which makes Sophie give up. Next up is Blade, but Blade is apprehensive about fighting Ernest while she clearly isn't in the best of condition. She insists that she is fine, however, but when she picks up her sword again, she falls to the ground and is caught by Blade. Blade later takes her to the infirmary, but the doctor says that there is nothing she can do for her. The doctor can heal basically any injury or disease. Even if you are on the brink of death, she could still probably bring you back. But curses are outside her area of expertise. Ernest wakes up and asks where she is, and Blade tells her that she passed out and he brought her here. She then tries to get up and asks if she did anything a little murdery, but Blade assures her that she just fell unconscious and collapsed, though she was really hard to carry. Ernest then tries to leave, but the doctor orders her to get back into bed and rest. Blade tells the doctor that he will look after Ernest if anything happens, so she should be allowed to leave, and the doctor allows it. Blade helps Ernest walk out of the infirmary, but as soon as she sees other students, she is more worried about her image and tells him that she can walk by herself. Blade tries to get her to rely on him a little more, but even if they are friends, Ernest doesn't want his help. Blade takes matters into his own hands and sneaks into the academy headquarters to find out some more information about Ernest's sword. He finds out that it is a demon sword, and who just lets a kid have a cursed demon sword. The next day, Blade asks to speak with Ernest in private, and she thinks that he is trying to threaten her to take her #1 spot. But Blade couldn't care less about that. What he actually cared about is Ernest, and she takes this as him asking her out. Blade then tells her that he knows the story behind her sword. Later in the evening, they meet on the top of the building, and Blade asks how she came into possession of a demon sword. And she tells him that when she was younger, that she accidentally touched the sword, and then the sword tried to get her to wreak havoc, but she's been able to fight back the urges up until now. Blade tells her that there is a way to get rid of that, and she knows, but it is dangerous, since if she does it, then a demon will come to life. However, Blade assures her that if demon spawns, then he will cut it down. Ernest agrees to do the pact and summons the demon. She appears in a dark space with the giant demon, and it nearly takes over her body, but Blade is there to keep her in check, and thanks to him, she is able to fight off the demon and defeat it. Later, Blade is training in the yard with 2 of his classmates. And oh my god, one of them needs to go get a refund from his barber with that yee-ass haircut. The 2 guys stand no chance against Blade and are clearly outmatched considering they can't lay a single finger on him. Blade is disinterested in the battle and notices Ernest across the yard talking to some other students, so he decides to stop fooling around and ends the fight with the 2 guys. Ernest walks up to him and admonishes him for disrespecting his classmates in the fight. He didn't even draw his sword the entire time and was looking elsewhere while fighting them. But if they couldn't beat him with that much, you're handicapped, and that sounds like a skill issue to me. Blade notices that Ernest looks nicer today for some reason. Ernest asks Blade what looks nice about her, but even with the help of the wingman Lance, he still has no idea what to say. Leonard yells at Blade for not noticing that Ernest changed her hairstyle, and Ernest is simply destroyed, but she bounces back. She asks Blade to keep an eye on Sophie since he seems to be free. She is training by herself and is always alone, even though she will diligently follow orders when given. But Blade was able to get her to tell him her name, so she at least likes him a little bit already, so she is leaving her in his care. Blade walks up to Sophie and tells her that he is there to help with her training, but she's a little apprehensive since the only weapon she can use are those hands. That is all that she was ever taught how to do, so Blade decides to teach her how to use his blade, but he says he won't force her if she doesn't want to do it. Sophie agrees to learn from him, but as Blade is demonstrating how to properly hold his blade, the lesson period ends, and the teacher asks the students to return to their classes, and Blade is disappointed since he only just pulled it out and hadn't gotten a chance to teach Sophie anything. Later, during another training period, Blade is instructing Sophie in the way of the sword, but she is unable to actually cut through anything yet. Blade instructs her to channel her fighting spirit into the sword the same way she would do with her fists, and performs a little demonstration which allows him to cut through the armor like butter. By that evening, Sophie has fully mastered the use of the sword and is able to cut through several sets of armor very easily. She asks Blade if now that she has learned how to use a sword, that she would be able to defeat Ernest in a fight. But Blade tells her that she is still probably a long way off from ever beating Ernest. Sophie says she understands and then immediately throws Blade to the ground and gets on top of him in a mount position before he can say a word. She says that it's probably better if she sticks to hand-to-hand combat for now, but she wants Blade to teach her something else tomorrow. Later, Blade is meeting with the king in his office when the king asks him how he's enjoying his new school life. Blade says he has made a few friends, one of which is Sophie, and the king asks him if he thinks that she is strong. Blade says she is strong, but the king says she is still incomplete since the end goal was for her to surpass Blade in strength. The king says Sophie is part of an artificial hero project which was created to make a hero that is as strong as Blade. Clearly unethical, but okay. Sophie is a clone that was experimented on to make her powerful, and even worse, this is the 12th clone of Sophie. Blade is about ready to throw hands with the king when he finally says that the organization that started the experiments have already been destroyed by him. When he found Sophie, he told her that she is free now, but the experiments had already taken their toll and turned her into an emotionless robot. Blade can't just let things go on like this, so he vows to help Sophie have the normal which she lost. But he isn't exactly Mr. Normal himself, so he goes to get some help. Blade goes to the nurse, who seems overly eager to get him naked and should probably be put on a watch list. He asks her what normal kids do at this age, and as she is about to give him an answer, he hears the words youth, and that's all he needed to hear. But he still doesn't know what youth means, so he goes to ask Leonard about it, and he says it means love. He then goes to ask Jessica and Claire what love is, and they tell him it's about dates, and we can already see where this is going. He then goes to Ernest's room and asks her what a date is, and Ernest, the poor girl, thinks he's asking her out. She tells him that one would walk around town and go shopping, but she isn't emotionally prepared for a date yet. But Blade already left to see Sophie after he got his answer. He gets to a large pink door and asks the guard where Sophie is at the moment, and the guard tells him that she is still inside the room, but Blade doesn't let her finish and barges straight into the girls' changing room, and without skipping a beat, he ignores all the naked girls around him and simply asks Sophie out on a date. This is exactly how you ask a girl out on a date, trust me. Later, Blade is waiting outside for Sophie, while Ernest, Jessica, and Claire are spying on him from a distance. They are all there to keep an eye on Blade to make sure that he doesn't do anything else that will get him canceled, and Ernest is proud to be hanging out with other people. You could practically say that they're friends. The clock chimes, and it is now time for Sophie and Blade's date. Sophie arrives perfectly on time, but she has no idea what a date is supposed to be, and neither does Blade, but that is why he did a lot of studying for this. He has a strict agenda for the date, but he spends so long explaining it that they are now 4 minutes behind schedule. So Sophie suggests that they start the date right away, and the two lock arms. The date goes as planned, and the two frolic through the city streets for a bit, while the others are still tailing them from behind. Blade and Sophie end up at an arcade, and Sophie wants to try a punching machine. The two gear up and throw a punch at the machine, but the machine can't handle the damage. That's some more property damage right there. But the others get the school to pay for it. Next on Blade's date itinerary is to share a drink with Sophie. They both put their mouth on the straws and move their faces close to each other, but at that moment, Blade's boy hormones kicked in, and you could feel something rising. At the end of the day, Blade and Sophie are sitting at the fountain, and Sophie says she had a lot of fun today, but she asks why Blade went through all the trouble of going on a date with her, and Blade says it's because they are friends. Sophie is delighted to know that Blade sees her as a friend, but friends don't keep secrets from each other, so she decides that there is something that she has to tell Blade. She tells him that she is not a human, but rather a test subject created to replace the hero, and so she was given artificial great hero powers, which can alter the laws of physics. She can change the shape of objects and alter gravity at will, and she can even stop time. But she can only do that for 10 seconds, so her power has its limits. Since she was honest with him, he decides that he might as well tell her the whole truth. He tells her that he is the great hero, or at least he used to be the great hero, but he has lost all his physics-altering powers now. But Sophie doesn't seem all that surprised by this revelation. He asks her if she already knew that he was in fact the hero of legends, but she denies it, saying that he just felt a little familiar to her. Blade apologizes for everything that has happened to her and tells her that she's free to resent him as much as she wants, but Sophie bears no resentment towards Blade at all. He blames himself that she was born with such cursed powers, and she had to go through the same thing that he went through of being forced to be a hero because you possess the power that can potentially save everyone. But despite everything that he did, the people would always get so angry when he couldn't save someone. He was a failure of a hero. But Sophie comes to console him and tells him that when she was rescued by the king, she came across several people and entire towns that were saved by him. But Blade can't be proud of how he lived his last life. Even still, Sophie aspires to be a great hero like Blade was, so the two promise to keep each other's pasts a secret. The next day, everyone is having lunch and Ernest points out that Blade has some food on his cheek, and Sophie takes the chance to wipe it off his cheek, making Ernest incredibly jealous. After that, the others show up to the table, and Ernest is surprised that they still think of her as a friend. They sit together and Ernest congratulates them on moving up to the advanced class, but Blade hadn't even realized yet. Thanks to that, Jessica and Claire are now allowed to wear whatever they want, and you can clearly tell who has the bolder fashion statement. Leonard spots the two new girls and rushes over to introduce himself as a ladies' man would do, and it's kind of working on Jessica. They continue with lunch, and Ernest mentions that she heard that the king was going to be bringing a magical beast into the school for training. But that sounds about right for something that crazy old man would do, so Blade's just going to keep eating. But the world refuses to let this man eat in peace, and the whole school starts shaking. They go to investigate, and Blade isn't letting his food go to waste, so he takes it with him. The cause of the earthquake was a dragon that got loose, and Blade isn't going to let this dragon ruin his lunch. So in one go, he jumps up and smacks that punk to the ground, all without dropping a single piece of food. Everyone is shocked that Blade just took down a dragon with his bare hands, but he says it's just a baby and is probably scared about being dragged into the school. He even feels bad enough to give it the food that he worked so hard to protect. This all seems like a normal afternoon for Blade, but he didn't realize that he's letting his main character in a show, and now everyone is backing away since they all know what happens to side characters when the main characters gets in a fight. As Blade tries to reason with them, he is alerted to the dragon transforming into a little girl and then jumping on him and calling him dad. Blade has got no clue what just happened, and he just doesn't realize that the girl clinging to him is the dragon until Sophie confirms it. That answers the question of where the dragon went, but it still doesn't explain why she's calling him dad. Later, Blade is taking a bath with the dragon, which he has named Q. He's wondering how this could happen. A guy's just trying to get some lunch, and now you got yourself a daughter. Just another normal afternoon for Blade. Ernest knocks on the bathroom door looking for Blade, and she just walks into the bathroom and then gets embarrassed when she sees Blade taking a bath. What else was he meant to be doing here? However, the word embarrassment doesn't exist in Blade's dictionary, so he just asks her what she learned about Q. Apparently, dragons that are defeated by humans can take on the form of a human and will seek out the one who defeated it. That is a rare occurrence, since normal humans aren't strong enough to kill dragons. Ernest ends up seeing Q in the bathtub with Blade, and she gets angry and stomps Blade in the face, but she's probably just jealous that it isn't her. Later the next day, Q is enjoying being spoiled by Blade, and she makes additional demands including morning kisses and feeding. She then outs Blade for staring at the girls' bodies and just walks away, leaving Blade's fate to be decided by the council. At training, Blade has been excluded from training with Ernest, so he calls Q over to train with him a little, and she's excited to play with Dad, but then the new people in the class come to him for help, and Q feels left out, so she just leaves. But later, Blade finds her and promises to get some food for her. After she's had her fill, she's sound asleep, and Blade is thinking this parenting thing isn't so bad. Ernest then knocks on his door and asks to talk in for a bit. Baby dragons get beat up by their parents as soon as they are born to teach them that there are stronger beings than them. But Q never got that, so Blade was the first one to smack some sense into her, and thus he is now her dad. However, Ernest says he can't pretend to be her dad forever, but Blade knows that if he doesn't do that, then she's going to be truly alone, and Ernest of all people should know what it feels like to be alone. Blade just stated straight facts, and Ernest has no comeback for that, so she has no choice but to agree. Sophie was also there. The facts were so solid that she didn't even say anything and just left. However, while Q said she doesn't need any friends aside from Blade, the reality is that she's so lonely and that she has to give herself head pats with dolls. Blade sees this and realizes that he has failed as a parent since his daughter has got no friends, but since she is a dragon, she won't become friends with anyone unless they beat her. But against a dragon, everyone in the class is weak, so Blade and Ernest come up with a plan. They are going to take all the students in the class and jump the dragon in unison. However, a dragon is still a dragon even if you plan to jump it, and their formation is almost immediately broken up. They run around in a disorganized mess until Ernest gets them to go back into formation, and under her leadership they begin their assault. They manage to evade Q's attacks and launch a barrage of attacks at her, but none of them do even a slight bit of damage. The king thinks the battle is lost since they have no way of fighting back against Q, but Blade doesn't think it's over yet. An opening presents itself and Ernest and Sophie use it to lay their best attacks on Q, causing a little damage to her. But that wasn't their only plan. While Q was distracted, Leonard dug out a pit beneath her, and now they're back in the fight. Ernest is spamming her Asmodeus flame attack, nearly making Asmodeus give out, and everyone is giving it their all to keep Q down. And finally, with the power of friendship, Ernest is able to gather the power to thoroughly decimate Q. In the end, Q ends up being defeated and sits on the floor exhausted. She starts to cry as she believes that she is weak for losing, and in Sparta, the weak children are yeeted. However, Blade is no Spartan, nor does he consider Q to be weak. It's just that the humans were stronger, and with the power of friendship, there was no way she could win. Having tasted defeat, Q has now acknowledged all the students as her equals and asked to be friends with them. The king found that battle to be very entertaining, and he can't wait to see what the students will be able to achieve next. He's got a new VR training system in construction, and he can't wait to see it completed. After the battle, all the students have lunch, and Claire is savoring every moment she can get of time feeding Q. But Q's not the only one who's been getting fed. Ernest really piled on the pounds, and Blade is just now noticing. No one else wants to mention it, but she's gotten chonker since we last saw her. Blade isn't one to beat around the bush, so he tells her the facts. You're fat now, deal with it. Ernest cannot deal with it, so she runs off, and the others blame Blade for making her run off. They tell him that because of this, she's most likely going to hate him from now on, and that's the one thing Blade doesn't want to happen. So he says he'll go and apologize to her right now. The others say they'll tag along since they are worried about her too, so they all go to her mansion. They knock on her door, but there is no answer. Jessica decides to open the door, so she picks the lock, and they find Ernest on the floor crying. But upon turning on the lights, they discover that she isn't crying, but rather, she's stuffing her face with desserts. Diabetes has entered the chat. Ernest begs them not to look at her. Ever since the fight with Q, she's been hungry all the time, and then she discovered all these desserts, and well, she's not proud of what happened next. She could never argue against Blade's solid facts, so there's no way she would be angry at him for it. That's all he needed to hear, so he's about to leave. But then Jessica and Claire grab him and tell him that if he doesn't say something to her now, she's gonna end up on my 600-pound life. Blade finally gets it and tells Ernest to get her ass to the gym. The next day, they begin training, and Ernest is giving it her best shot. They do the exercises, she goes on a diet, and she goes to a sauna. But at the end of the training montage, she still does this to the scale. The others don't know what to do at this point. They've run out of ideas to make her lose weight. The next day, she tries something drastic instead, so she asks Blade to guard her in case something happens. She's going to literally burn the calories off her body with her sword. They are standing there when Ernest emerges from the flames with a thinner body, though it's still covered in fire. Soon after, she collapses to the ground and is once again hungry. She takes one look at Claire, and in her hungry delusions, thinks that looks tasty. She charges, but Blade isn't going to let one of his friends end up on the menu, so he uses his sword to knock some sense into her. After all that work, she has finally regained her normal form, and everything goes back to normal. But the next day, she's back to being Big Chungus. She says it's fine since she can just burn the calories with her sword, but the others are done sugarcoating it for her. That's loser talk. Later, Blade is walking down the halls when Claire calls him over to a corner of the room. She introduces him to a girl, Maria, and Blade recognizes her from the fight with Q, and she was absolutely no help whatsoever. Once again, Blade has stated ironclad facts, and Maria knows that she is a klutz, but she has a favor to ask of Blade. She wants him to kill her. Later, they sit down at a lunch table to discuss what she meant. She wants Blade to kill her if she ever loses control since she isn't human. Blade had already guessed that she was a night demon. When Maria gets stressed or angry, it causes her to lose control of her strength, and even just thinking about it is enough to make her accidentally smash a teacup. She doesn't want to accidentally lose control in the school and end up being kicked out since she has nowhere else to go. It would be a travesty for Blade to let his friend go through something so difficult without offering his help, and everyone else joins in to support her. They go to the training grounds and turn up the barrier to max capacity. Blade then asks her to release her power as it might help her like it helped Ernest. She is reluctant at first, but then she concedes and prepares to take off her limiters. She starts taking them off and her power is rising by 2 times, then 4, then 16. She is about to take off the last one that will raise her power by 160 times, and that is when Ernest realizes that maybe she isn't cut out to handle this. She tries to stop Maria, but it's too late. She has already begun to transform, and by the end of it, she now claims to be the Demon Lord. They can tell that she's bad news, so Ernest immediately turns into her demon form to fight her, but that doesn't do anything and she is blown away immediately. The others try to jump in to help, but they can't do much to stop her. Sophie and Q try to tag team her, but even that proves to be ineffective. Blade is now the only one standing, but even he isn't able to do any meaningful damage to Maria. She gets annoyed that he's not trying to kill her and states that if he doesn't take this seriously, then she's going to kill him. Blade tries various other attacks, but none of them seem to be landing, but he's at least able to keep up. However, his sword isn't going to last much longer. Maria launches another attack at him and he manages to block it, but his sword doesn't make it. Ernest crawls over to him and hands him Asmodeus to continue the fight, and this time, he intends to end it in one blow. He charges up the attack and Maria is still as smug as ever, thinking that there's no way a human could ever beat her. But as soon as the attack hits, she isn't so smug anymore. Blade has managed to bring her down and everyone else is still alive, but Blade has expended too much power, so he's out of commission. Blade later wakes up and is immediately hugged by the nurse, who's also scolding him for being reckless. He died back there, but she managed to bring him back to life. He promises to be more careful from now on and asks about the state of the others. They're all alive and kicking, even Maria, who now freely walks the halls and is greeted by the students as if she didn't just try to kill them all. Blade meets up with her and she's figured out that he was the former great hero. He tells Maria not to say anything, but she says she isn't Maria. She doesn't really have a name, but everyone keeps calling her Demao. They later go to talk to the king about all this, and he tells them that he knew about her origins. And though her mother was human, that she is the Demon Lord's daughter. Though she seems to be adjusting to everyday life, she's even got her own fan club already. She's wearing her limiters, so for now she's just an ordinary student here, so Ernest tells Demao to get back to class. And Claire is wondering what happened to Maria. That night, after Blade had put Q to sleep, Demao shows up at his window and invites him out on a nighttime date. Before Blade can answer, she carries him off into the night sky and Blade asks her how old she is. She answers that she only gained self-awareness 5 years ago, so she is 5. She lands on a roof and tells Blade that she wants him to treat her as a lady since she is attached to him. The only reason she chose to stay at the school is because likes Blade for some reason. It may be because magical creatures seek out other creatures with strength, but right now, Blade is in no condition to fight her. So there's one other possibility. Maybe she's just attracted to Blade. And so to test that theory, she asks Blade to mate with her. However, he doesn't know how to do that, and neither does she. Since neither of them know what they are doing, Blade suggests that they just have a battle to get it out of their system. But he is too injured to fight right now, and she can't take off the pendant that's limiting her power due to Maria's consciousness. A few days later, another kid, Eliza, shows up and tells them that the pendant might be able to bring her back, and Demao agrees to let it happen. Eliza activates the pendant and a message from the Demon King is played. He says that no matter what happens to him, he will always love her, and that is enough to give Maria the courage to fight for her body. Demao doesn't really fight back and she lets Maria take control of the body again. Now that that's all over, some time passes and the group goes to town for some fun. However, their expedition is cut short as the path is blocked off by a carriage. Ernest asks who owns the carriage so that they can have it moved. She finds that the carriage is owned by a centaur, and as the centaur is about to introduce herself, Blade seems to recognize her. Her name is Dione and she also recognizes Blade as the great hero, but that's still a secret, so Blade tells her to keep her trap shut. Ernest asks Blade how he knows Dione and she's a terrible liar. Anyway, Blade asks her what she's going to do about the carriage blocking the path and Q offers to assist with it. Blade asks where they be taking the carriage and unfortunately, its destination is the king. Dione reports to the king that his cargo has been delivered and he thanks her for the good work. He also has her next assignment ready to go, and that is to become a teacher at the academy. Back at the academy, Dione is squaring up against several blocks of god iron, which is stated to be indestructible, but that iron had never met Dione and she blows right through it with ease, even causing it to melt into a puddle. That was a good warm-up, and she's now ready to teach the class, but she hasn't introduced herself yet. She's Daeon the Demon Lance, and Ernest now knows where she's heard that name before. Daeon was a top general in the army and fought alongside the great hero, but now that begs the question, how the hell does Blade knows her if she is that accomplished? Later, Blade is bathing Q while the girls clean Daeon, and she's loving it. But then Jessica starts probing about her past with Blade, and Daeon has no escape now. She is still a terrible liar, and Jessica is buttering her up until she cracks, but Blade can't let her crack, so he stops Jessica. Ernest is angry that Blade would just barge into the women's bathroom, but Jessica has figured out by now that Blade has got the libido of a Buddhist monk, and to prove it, she flashes him right there. Daeon starts talking about when she first met Blade, about when he was 5 years old. He couldn't speak, and he was basically a wild animal at that point, and he had thought she was a regular horse, so he tried to eat her, and he nearly actually did it too. Then after a few years, she had trained herself well enough to not be eaten, and to join the great hero in battle. Though no one can tell that she is still talking about Blade, several days later, Ernest and Blade are out shopping when Ernest asks Blade what they should get for Daeon as a gift. Blade knows Daeon really well, and he says she loves cabbage a lot, so they should get that. Ernest is once again curious as to what the exact details of his relationship with Daeon, but her interrogation is cut short by a simur flying overhead. They are one of the national birds, and they aren't known for attacking people at random, so they think it will be fine to ignore it. However, the bird makes a nosedive, and Blade has to push Ernest out of the way. The bird attacks a wagon, and Ernest is about to engage, but Blade tells her to stay calm, and the bird flies away. Blade already knows this has the king's fingerprints all over it. Ernest bursts into the king's office and demands to know what the hell is going on to make a bird attack a wagon like that. And this dude, he stole their fucking egg. There's at least more to the story than just that, and it's more like the simur birds are new to being parents and are making terrible decisions which would lead to the egg never hatching. So the king is acting as CPS to save the egg. He also thought it would be good training for the students, so he tells Ernest that her mission is to save the egg. The next day, they prepare their plan to save the egg and make it hatch safely. They are going to raise it to the height that will let it hatch without the parents finding it. The distraction team engages the birds, but their attacks prove to be ineffective. However, they do not need to beat the birds, they just need to stall for time, so the cable tie it down to the buildings nearby. The cable is made of god iron, but the buildings are not, so the bird just flies away with the houses, and several people are now homeless. They keep stalling the birds, but when the time finally comes to raise the egg, the pulley just stops midway. The others tell Blade to go and get the egg while they handle the bird, and he starts running up the wall to get to it. But it is harder than normal since he's stuck at 15% of his power. However, help is on the way, and Daeon comes running up the wall to help him and offer him a ride. With her help, they are able to get the egg up, and after one final confrontation with the bird, the egg is finally able to hatch. Out of it comes 2 baby chicks, but since Blade is the first person that they see after that hatch, they imprint on him, and he now has 2 more children. This was the end of episode 6.